a single, sustained piano chord. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the year 2026 has started with quite a few shocks, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy. However, my feeling also tells me that this is just the beginning, and that events are waiting for us that we can't even imagine today, not even in our wildest fantasies. And if history, as it has in the centuries and decades before, goes crazy once again, Germany, as the center of Europe, will once again be directly affected. Because, as Friedrich Schiller had his Wilhelm Tell say, even the most pious man cannot live in peace if it does not please his evil neighbor. An impressive example from our history is the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, built between 1789 and 1793. What kinds of flags have not been hung on it? First, it was the black and white flag of Prussia, then from 1871, the black and white of the Empire. In 1918 and 1919, the socialist red of the Revolution. In 1920, during the Kapp Putsch, the Imperial War flag, and then the black, red, and gold of the Weimar Republic. From 1933, the red flag of the National Socialists with the swastika hung there, which in 1945 was replaced by the red flag of the Communist Soviet Union. In 1949, with the founding of the German Democratic Republic, black, red, and gold hung there once again. From 1959, it was adorned with the state emblem, hammer, compass, and wreath of grain, until even this flag, on the 3rd. October 1990 was replaced by the black, red, and gold of the Federal Republic of Germany. And surely, the protagonists who hung up the flags were always convinced that their colors would hang there forever. But what I have just described in a few sentences using the example of the flags has changed Germany as dramatically as no other country in modern times has had to experience. But what do you mean? Could the respective protagonists of their time have guessed what the near future would bring them? Or were they just as unable to imagine the truly unthinkable, just as we ourselves can only guess at the future? We can sense it, but not predict it. Now, to be able to understand what I want to tell you, I ask you to imagine you are sitting in the late summer of 1913, so 113 years ago, with 3 friends in a beer garden somewhere in Germany. As is well known, it stretched from the Meuse to the Memel, from the Adige to the Belt. Once you have mentally arrived in the year 1913, we can begin. Today is September 2nd. Together with your friends, you celebrate Sedan Day and honor the veterans who defeated the French army at Sedan in 1870. And of course, you personally are also proud of the Second German Empire, founded by Otto von Bismarck in 1971, and of His Majesty Emperor Karlsruhe II. You are proud of the prosperity achieved in Germany, its Nobel Prize winners, the acquired colonies, and finally, the last 42 years of peace. But out of nowhere, a stranger approaches your table. Gentlemen, I see you are in high spirits, and I have also listened to your conversation. Yes, our glorious German Reich. But how do you think it will look in 10 years? So, in the year 1923.
20.
The 4 of you look at each other amused. Well, that's a welcome change. Someone who claims to be able to predict the future and has chosen us as his audience. But what new things could he possibly tell us? Because things will surely continue as they have so far. After all, thanks to the peace policy of our emperor, there has been peace for 42 years. And every year, things keep getting better. But who knows? Maybe the good sir will bring one of us a grand prize in the class lottery. So, dear sir, tell us about the future. Hopefully you won't get too bored. The stranger looks at you thoughtfully. Boring? Well, If I can promise you one thing, it's that the future of Germany will definitely not be boring. And there are constantly new turning points. For the first one you experience, you only have to wait 5 years. Because in 5 years, our empire will no longer exist. And there will also be no emperor, who, at the end of 1918, has to emigrate to Holland after a revolution in Germany. And the centuries-old kingdoms of Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, and Württemberg will also be history forever, as well as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and even the Tsardom in Russia, the country that will later be called the Soviet Union, and, from 1922 on, will be ruled by a dictator. I know, gentlemen, all of this is completely unimaginable for you today, and yet it will happen. Because, as you will experience for yourselves, in less than a year, a world war will break out due to the fault of all European countries. It will last 4 years and make the world a stranger.
Jahre dauert und die Welt verändert.
And since you are all trained reservists, you will be there as soldiers from the very first day. In this war, Germany and Austria-Hungary will fight against half the world, against Russia, England, and France with its colonies. At first with flags flying, but in the end with airplanes, submarines, poison gas, massive cannons, and even armored vehicles. In 1918, hundreds of thousands of women and children in Germany die of starvation because of the North Sea blockade set up by the English. Although together with Austria we defeat Russia, after the Americans arrive in the summer of 1918 for financial reasons, we have to capitulate in November. 2 million German soldiers do not return home. They are wounded. The only real winners are the Americans, who financed our enemies. After the revolution, a civil war follows in which Germans shoot at Germans. Then comes a new state, a democracy called the Weimar Republic, with a former saddler journeyman as the president of the Reich. In this republic, politicians are repeatedly murdered in broad daylight. Then, in 1919, under duress, we sign a treaty dictated by the victors, which imposes billions of gold marks in tribute payments on Germany. The last installment will be on the 3rd. It will be paid on October 3rd, 2010, so in 91 years. All our colonies are also taken away. France takes back Alsace-Lorraine, and Poland takes most of the Prussian provinces, West Prussia and Posen. Germany is only allowed to maintain an army of 100,000 soldiers and a small navy without any battleships. Yes, gentlemen, fate has not been kind to us, but this is only the beginning. We are now in the year 1923, right in the middle of the Weimar Republic. After the bloody, sometimes brutal civil war battles with thousands of dead, democracy can barely hold its ground. How could it be any different after so many centuries of monarchy? On top of that, there's also the deep mistrust of the population toward those who came to power in 1918 through a revolution as usurpers. In 1923, in the middle of peacetime, 100,000 French and Belgian soldiers occupied the Ruhr region and exploited it. Now, Germany's once so strong gold currency is also collapsing. I know you won't believe me, but if you want to buy a loaf of bread in 10 years, you'll need 500 billion Reichsmarks for it. And the number of unemployed also shoots up to 4 million. But then a currency reform and international treaties give hope for stability. In 1925, an elderly former field marshal, von Hindenburg, is elected Reich president, but our country does not come to rest. 2 demagogues, both without professional training, both having lived in a homeless shelter at times, use the simplest political slogans to appeal to the hungry masses. One of them, Adolf Hitler, who comes from Austria, which after 1918 was reduced to a small remnant territory, calls his political movement National Socialism, while the movement of his opponent from Hamburg, Ernst Thälmann, is called International Socialism or Communism. At this time, more and more countries around Germany are turning to dictatorships. When there are more than 6 million unemployed people in Germany in 1932/33, the last attempts are made to halt the radical turn by installing conservative liberal governments. But it is too late. You, gentlemen, will experience for yourselves how the responsible politicians in the Reichstag, in their often unstable coalitions, are increasingly losing contact with the voters. When elections are once again held in 1933 without clear results, a man who had only been naturalized as a German in the Free State of Brunswick in 1932, as a representative of the National Socialists, in short, the Nazis, is appointed Chancellor of the Reich in a coalition. But he wants to be addressed as "my Führer." Well, have you heard enough? Or do you want to learn more about what happened between 1933 and 1943? But I can already tell you that what you've heard so far is nothing compared to what's coming next. Admittedly, at first there are undeniable economic and even social successes under the new government. But these are also accompanied by openly committed murders of internal and external opponents, the beginning of exclusion and persecution of the German Jewish minority, and the beginning of a loss of legal rights, including so-called concentration camps for opponents of the regime. On the other hand, in 1938, the Reich Chancellor, who calls himself Führer, Hitler, adds his old homeland Austria to the German Reich as the so-called Ostmark, as well as, a year later, the newly created state of Czechoslovakia after the World War. Yes, most Germans are proud that their country is now being taken seriously again all over the world. And you, as frontline soldiers of the World War, are also pleased about the strong army that has been restored, considering that all of this was achieved in just 20 years after the lost World War. But gentlemen, don't rejoice too soon, because this is actually just the beginning of the end. Because in 1939, Germany and our allied Soviet Union jointly conquer Poland, which is allied with France and England, and divided among themselves, which, however, also triggers the Second World War. But in doing so, France and England do not declare war on both aggressors, but only on Germany. But then, in a very short time, it defeats Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Greece, and the state of Yugoslavia, which was founded after the First World War. And from February 1941, our troops are even in Africa. But then, in June of this year, together with our allies Italy, Hungary, Finland, Romania, and Slovakia, we attack the heavily armed Soviet Union. In the winter, our troops are at the gates of Moscow. But instead of supporting us, Japan, which is allied with Germany, attacks the USA in December 1941. A few days later, Germany also declares war on the Americans. The Americans, now together with the English allied with them, respond with the systematic destruction of German cities, for which, yes, you heard that right, again and again, up to 1,000 bombers are used, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of German civilians. But then, at the turn of the year 1942, 1943, when 10 years have passed since the end of my last reflection, our armies are standing. After some defeats, but even more victories in all the conquered European countries, in Africa, and also deep in the Soviet Union. Then, however, the stranger slowly sweeps his right hand with the outstretched index finger over his 4 listeners. And as for what concerns you personally in all of this, of course, you are once again wearing a uniform from the very beginning. Only this time, two of you will not be coming home. The two places that will seal your fate are Stalingrad and Königsberg. But what I am about to announce to you now for the next 10 years, until 1953, is even more dramatic for Germany than everything I have told you so far. Because from 1943 on, Germany's luck in the war comes to an end. One German army after another is destroyed. One German city after another sinks into a hail of bombs. New weapons are constantly being invented. Devices that allow you to see in the dark. Rockets and airplanes that fly so fast you can hardly follow them with your eyes. Bombs that can kill hundreds of thousands of people with a single detonation. Millions of cultural assets are destroyed forever. Then the million-strong armies of our opponents march into Germany, which surrenders unconditionally in May 1945. More than 5.3 million of our soldiers have fallen, millions wounded, millions taken prisoner of war, millions driven from their ancestral land in East Germany. Reports of the most serious crimes against humanity committed in the name of Germany shock the public. Many of those responsible evade earthly judges by committing suicide. Others flee or go into hiding. Then something happens that is actually unthinkable. With the occupation by the victorious opponents, the German Reich, lying in ruins and rubble, ceases to exist as a state. There is no longer a government, nor do previous laws apply. From now on, an Allied Control Council rules over Germany. All patents are confiscated. Germany and its capital, Berlin, are divided among America, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. In many trials, the victors sentence German politicians and generals to death or to long prison terms. Then someone in the group interrupts you with the words, "That's enough now, sir, because if everything you are imagining were true, that would be the final end of Germany. And if everything really were so destroyed, which actually isn't even possible, rebuilding would take 100 years or more." I'm sorry that I have to tell you this so bluntly, but history simply doesn't care about people's feelings. And I admit that for the two of you who are experiencing this post-war period, it must seem as if the goal of many European politicians, the end of Germany, has been fulfilled. But please, let me just continue. Because after the two very different main players, America and the Soviet Union, defeated and destroyed Germany together for different reasons, they became enemies. And what is called the Cold War begins. One result of this is that in 1949, in the part occupied by the Americans, British, and French, the Federal Republic of Germany is founded with its capital in Bonn, and in East Germany with its capital in East Berlin, the founding of the German Democratic Republic. However, neither of the two completely disarmed states can take even the smallest political step without the approval of its protective power. In the West, America, and in the East, the Soviet Union. And these two states, now called superpowers and equipped with weapons of mass destruction, are grouping the states dependent on them into huge military blocs that view each other with suspicion. As for the two separated Germanys up to 1953, almost nothing in them is the same as it was in our time, 1913. Now there are new political faces, new flags, anthems, parties, laws, new traditions, and role models. Yes, I know it myself, gentlemen. That's all pretty hard to swallow. And I don't blame anyone for doubting my words. But I assure you again that I am only describing the future to you as it will unfold. Even if you think all of this is completely impossible. Probably just as impossible as what is going to happen in the next 20 years. from 1953 to 1973. Because now the Germans in the West and East are rolling up their sleeves and getting to work rebuilding their country. West Germany has it much easier with the introduction of the Deutsche Mark and its American-supported economic system than the 17 million Germans in central Germany, who have to deal with a centrally planned economy imposed from above. And even if you doubt my words again now, 1955 or... In 1955 and 1956, armies are established in both German states and integrated into the military blocs of their respective hegemonic powers. The one in the GDR is called the National People's Army and is reminiscent of the Wehrmacht, which was destroyed in 1945. The one in the West is called the Bundeswehr and outwardly looks like a copy of the American Army. But what surely no one at that time could imagine, and what you, after everything you've heard so far, certainly wouldn't believe me either. After a while, both German armies are considered the conventional elite within their respective blocs. Economically, things are improving. But while in the West, prosperity is setting one record after another, and people have to work less and less for good pay, many own their own apartments or houses, and have their own car, which they use to go on vacation twice a year. The development in the GDR is progressing much more slowly. At the beginning of the 1960s, the leadership there had a wall built that stretched from the Baltic Sea all the way to Bavaria. But when I look into the future now, since the 1960s, I mainly see people in the West sitting in their living rooms in front of electrically powered devices with a screen where films and other moving images are shown. Contemporaries call this television. And if you want the rooms at home to be warmer in winter, you just have to turn a small switch on the wall and the temperature goes up. Everyone has a telephone with which you can call anywhere in the world. Every day, giant airplanes transport people to the most remote places on Earth. The long swimsuits they used to wear are also a thing of the past, because nowadays, in the swimming pool, neither men nor women wear much at all. But while in the GDR, people who didn't have as much Western luxury grew closer together, in the other Germany, unrest began in the mid-1960s, some of which was almost civil war-like. One of your friends has now stood up. Listen, you braggart, that's enough now. You must be out of your mind, trying to feed us such tall tales. How is all of that supposed to work? None of it fits together at all. From our peaceful times straight into a world war that we're supposedly going to lose. With our army? And then that nonsense about the Kaiser in exile, and in Holland of all places, making way for a saddler's apprentice? Or that story about the Austrian who calls himself Führer, conquers half of Europe, and marches all the way to Moscow, which is supposed to end after a few years with Germany no longer existing, and instead some foreigners ruling over us. You'd really have to dream up nonsense like that, especially since you also told us that after all that chaos, the Germans are supposed to be much better off than we are today. Tell me, which madhouse did you escape from? The stranger takes a deep breath. Gentlemen, I realize that here in our year 1913, after 42 years of peace, you have lost the ability to imagine the impossible. And unfortunately, you are also determined to get rid of me. How I would love to tell you about the decades after 1973, the fantastic technical inventions, and the medical treatments that border on miracles. The politics that shifted from reality to morality. The growth of Europe into a union, the peaceful unification of the two Germanys, the final loss of East Prussia and Silesia, the introduction of a European currency, of military deployments of the German army in the Balkans and in Afghanistan, and of course, of a childless woman who lets herself be called Mutti as the German chancellor and who is responsible for. One of her friends finally loses his temper. That's it. We've had enough of this blowhard. Just let us celebrate Sedan Day in peace and stop annoying us with your tall tales. Because even if only 10% of that were true, it would be completely illogical and impossible. Listen, impossible. The only thing missing is that you want to make us believe you met the man underground. While the stranger had only looked at the four with pity until now, he now smiles at them. Oh, man, yes, I actually completely forgot to mention that. Do you remember that I mentioned the so-called television sets in the living room earlier? In them, on the 20th, on July 20, 1969, Germans can watch as two Americans walk on the moon. But in 1913, that's also the moment when one of them rushes to the phone to have this apparently mentally disturbed person sent for medical treatment. But he was only telling the truth. Nothing but the truth. Everyone should draw their own conclusions from this today.